And now we are live. Hello, everyone. This is Andrew Hall, and with me today is David Niosi. I'm going to read David's bio from Psychology Today. He's done so many incredible things for the cause, but that I can't even list them all. It'd be one of those 5 or 10-page resumes. We're just going to focus on the Psychology Today bio. David Niosi is an attorney who served as president of 2 Washington-based humanist advocacy groups, the American Humanist Association and the Secular Coalition for America. He is author of Non-Believer Nation, The Rise of Secular Americans and Fighting Back the Right, Reclaiming America from the Attack on Reason. David, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here. Larry.
I hope everything's going well with you and yours.
All is well here. How about with you?
Oh, just fine. Actually, we're very lucky. My child, who is 15 years old, is doing distance-only education. And so I don't have to worry about her bringing back COVID-19 to my house. So I think that's pretty positive. And I'm just hoping that the vaccine comes up more sooner than later, but we'll see what happens.
I think we all are, yeah.
Right. You know, you wrote this fantastic article called "Are Americans Just Stupid?" And that seemed to be a lot of our liberal minds these days seem to be just confused about what's going on in the country. We've been confused about it for the last 4 years. And the simple thing that comes to people's minds are, God, we just have to be stupid to let these things happen to us. And what I've been hoping for is to get a bit of another voice to say, no, we're not just a bunch of stupid heads, and this is the government that we deserve. And your article gave me some hope. I'll say that much.
Well, I'm glad. I'd like to think that it was more or less optimistic. The funny thing is, the article is entitled "Are Americans Just Stupid?" And I'll give a spoiler right from the start. My answer is no, Americans aren't just stupid. Nevertheless, you'd be surprised how much hate mail I got over the last week or so from people who obviously didn't read the article, but were mad at me for calling Americans stupid. I was accused of being elitist and all sorts of other things that are much worse that shouldn't be repeated on a family program like this. But it's really interesting that you try to bring some dialogue to the issue, and you don't always get met with rational dialogue back.
That is funny and sad at the same time.
Right.
That you're writing an article that says, in part, Americans aren't stupid, and yet people who haven't read the article are attacking you because they think they're calling Americans stupid.
Right. That's exactly what happened. So maybe some Americans are stupid, but I think the thrust of the article is really that anti-intellectualism as a social cultural force, if you will, is a complicated issue. It's not just a matter of a certain group of people having lower intelligence than the rest of humanity. That's not what's going on. It's much more complicated. There's a lot of factors that go into it. Biological factors, environmental factors, and we do live in an anti-intellectual society, but that's different than saying Americans are stupid.
So let's compare our anti-intellectual society to maybe a more intellectual society. Can you give an example of a society that, and this might just be shooting fish in a barrel, but a society that actually listens to science and is more rational?
Well, I think generally speaking, if you look, in Western Europe, especially Scandinavia, you'll see populations that don't deny scientific fact at the same rate that Americans do. Americans, generally speaking, especially in the Bible Belt, but just generally speaking, deny evolution at a much higher rate than people in the rest of the industrial world, really. They deny, human-caused climate change at a higher rate, things like that. So, rates of conservative religiosity are much higher here in the States than they are in most of the rest of the developed world as well.
Right. Does that religiosity, and I know we're talking about causality, and that's always difficult to pull together. Is it the fact that we're a more religious society that creates this anti-science, anti-intellectualism?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, certainly there's a correlation. Whether the correlation equates to cause, I'm not in a position to really answer with any finality. But you have to look at that correlation and believe that there's a tendency among those who want to take the Bible literally to deny any scientific facts that seem to conflict with biblical literacy. It certainly seems like there's some sort of causation going on there.
Right. As I was reading the article, I was reflecting and thinking that we seem to have this society that incentivizes smart people doing not so smart things.
Well, yeah, I think that's true. It's especially true in America, but actually, if it is true even on a broader scale. But if you look at the number of graduates who, go on to get MBAs and work in the financial sector, as opposed to, studying science and improving the breadth of scientific knowledge in the world, it's really quite stunning. I don't have these statistics right in front of me, but in my second book, Fighting Back the Right, I talk about that, how, as a culture, we've constructed our institutions and pointed our society in a direction that really is all about money and finance and profit. And you don't have to be a socialist to view this as a real problem. But it's really true. The brightest minds in America are, generally speaking, pointed in the direction of making big bucks on Wall Street or in the corporate sector as CEOs. You're going to make a lot more money doing that than you are going into a lab, trying to expand scientific knowledge. So, and the numbers really show it. As I said, I don't have them handy, but it's a great number of people towards the MBAs in finance and business, as opposed to into science and technology.
Has it always been that way?
I'm not so sure how far back you have to go to see the numbers much different, but certainly it's been that way for in all of the post-war, since World War II going forward, and the numbers have only gotten even more disproportionate as time has gone on.
Interesting. Tiplin Philosopher from the chat says, I think the data suggests a correlation with fundamentalism as opposed to general religiosity in terms of people having irrational beliefs.
Yeah, I think that is true, and I think I refer to it as conservative religiosity, but call it fundamentalism, as if you will. But yeah, I would agree with that, generally speaking. Of course, even in liberal religion, there's some sort of what shall we call it? Divide. But you have to kind of compartmentalize your life. You can be a liberal believer, but if you still believe in the Trinity and most of the tenets of Christianity or Islam or whatnot, you really are kind of embracing beliefs that more or less conflict with what scientific knowledge would seem to suggest. But if it doesn't get in the way of rationally dissecting public policy and issues of the day, then it doesn't get in the way, and it's not so problematic. It becomes problematic when those irrational beliefs actually obstruct human-centered public policy.
Right. True enough. I was reading through your article, and you make the point that this character trait of anti-intellectualism, and to paraphrase it, it basically blinds our frontal lobes, or at least it inhibits our frontal lobes to think and to reason properly. Is that correct?
Well, the article didn't get into brain anatomy or anything like that. I don't think I referred to any frontal lobes, but anti-intellectualism, by definition, is a refusal to embrace critical thinking and acknowledge facts that are well established.
So, are there other characteristics, personality characteristics, that would help intellectualism or foster intellectualism?
Well, I think that the best way to analyze it is to realize that the human animal is not a critical thinker by default, that anti-intellectual tendencies are part of our physiology, if you will. We don't naturally confront every situation that we deal with in our lives rationally and with critical thought. We are emotional beings naturally. We can be intellectually lazy naturally. We jump to conclusions quite naturally. And these tendencies, these impulses, for one reason or another, have had survival value. That they're just impulses and tendencies that we have quite naturally. So I think if we acknowledge that at the outset and then realize that, we do want a rational society and a critically thinking society, especially when it comes to formulating public policy and, setting up the structure of our culture, then knowing that we have these biological tendencies, but we also have the biological ability to think critically and rationally, we want to think about our institutions and what kind of institutions are going to dominate the culture, what kind of institutions are going to be influential in creating the kind of culture that we want. And, there's a lot that goes into it. Of course, conservative religion or fundamentalism would seem to be an obstacle to that kind of society that we're looking at. Now, we want religious freedom. We don't want to just, be banning religion. But I think to the extent that we can disempower religious influence in terms of creating public policy and shaping public policy, that's a good start. And to the extent that we can, maybe not as a government, but as people generally, sway people away from conservative religion and fundamentalism, I'd like to think in the long run, maybe 5 generations from now, hopefully fundamentalism and conservative religion will be a much smaller segment of the population than it is now. That would be something we could do to move in the direction, hopefully, of critical thinking. One thing I mentioned in the article is a book that came out half a century ago, Richard Hofstadter's Anti-Intellectualism in American Life. The book won a Pulitzer Prize, and it's a great read. It's still very relevant today, and I'd recommend it to anyone. But he spends about, a third to 40% of the book as he's discussing anti-intellectualism in American life. Almost that large of a segment of the book is devoted to religion and the influence of religion on American society. And this is half a century ago. So and we've only seen the influence seem to grow in recent generations, at least politically. So I think looking at the institution of religion and thinking about, the direction we want society to go in terms, especially as the viewer mentioned, a fundamentalist religion, conservative religion, that's a big step. But there are other institutions as well, as I mentioned in the article.
True enough. I was reading through one of your older articles, the one just before this, about moral cowardice. When I think about how powerful anti-intellectual is in this country. It's almost as if we're getting hit by two fists. One is that that thinking is hard, and we're not really evolved to be great thinkers. But yet at the same time, there is a definite trend for people to be moral cowards, and that's because we want to get along with each other and we don't want to stand out. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, well, I think, we're social animals, and that's another trait that has evolved, as we've evolved. We've been successful as a species because we are social animals. And what does it mean to be a social animal? Well, it depends on the context, I guess. But, as hunters and gatherers, no doubt, the tendency to have strong bonds with your immediate clan, your immediate community, and to be suspicious of outsiders to a certain degree anyway, and to watch out for yourselves, to perhaps be suspicious of people from afar, and that all these things are natural impulses. So if we're going to get along with the group, then the tendency to embrace groupthink is understandable. If other members of the group seem to be thinking a certain way about a certain thing, you have to think, well, does it make sense to dissent? Does it make sense to make waves? Should I just go along with what people are thinking and saying? Maybe even to start to doubt yourself if everyone else is thinking a different way. We're not naturally independent thinkers. We have some natural tendency to just conform. So these tendencies make us cowardly in some contexts. In the modern era now, here we are, in a much more complex society, but where we have these natural tendencies not to want to be the one to stand up and say, hey, the emperor's wearing no clothes, that sort of thing. And this is something that, people have recognized for a long time. But, that's why we see people very hesitant to question hyper-patriotism. It's so easy for politicians to appear popular by being over-the-top patriotic to the extent that they're nationalistic. Because very few people are going to stand up and object to that and say, hey, is this really necessary?
We're all, both of us who are in the chat, both of us, we try to be skeptics, as skeptical as possible, reasonable people. But we come across so many times in the course of a day, irrationality. How do you decide what hill you're going to die on, so to speak, or what argument you're going to pick up? Because you can't do everything. You can't pick up every single argument that comes your way and engage with that person, because that means you just be arguing all the time, I would imagine.
Right.
Do you have a rule of thumb?
I really don't. For me, it's more of a case by case. But over time, I will tell you, I've become less and less inclined to engage. I think in the early days of the internet, it just seemed like it was the place to have a public forum. It was a great tool to debate and get ideas out there. And I think a lot of people were kind of idealistic, thinking, oh, this new medium is really going to change things. It's all positive because we're going to be able to have a more democratic exchange of ideas. We don't have to worry about getting all our news from just a few journalistic sources. We'll have this widespread kind of a Wikipedia view of the world where all the knowledge is out there and we can all absorb it. A lot of people, myself included, didn't really see the downside, which is that there is such thing as too much information. When everybody has a voice, you realize that there are a lot of voices out there that don't really deserve much attention, but they get attention anyway. So I'm still grappling with the issue, and I really don't know anyone who isn't, quite frankly. It's pretty hard to find a good balance because there is just so much bad information out there, and there are so many just loudmouths, for less of a lack of a better word, who seem to think whoever shouts the loudest is the smartest one in the room. So, I just try to be a little bit more selective about what I allow myself to even be exposed to online, quite frankly. And I ignore a lot of the clamor and just try to navigate that way.
What you go to in terms of online sources of news or in information?
Well, I subscribe to New York Times, Boston Globe, Bloomberg, just to try to keep an eye on, what's happening in that part of the world. And I read a lot of other stuff online, but and I'm on Facebook, so I see stuff come up on my timeline, and of course, like everyone else, I'm susceptible to clickbait sometimes. But I try to look at the source before I click on it.
Sure.
There's a lot of stuff I don't subscribe to, but I'll still read if I see it come up, from various sources.
Blazing Wizard Pope says in Denmark, the religious freedom is very explicit. You're allowed to believe whatever you want, but you're not allowed to act on your beliefs if they go against other laws.
That's right. Yeah. No, that's part of the problem these days is that the idea of religious freedom has kind of taken on a new meaning. Years ago, it used to mean what the viewer said, but now it seems to mean your religion is a trump card for any law you don't like, which can only create a lot of problems going forward.
Definitely. I don't see how society can be cohesive if people are serious about every religious group basically being able to decide what part of the law they're going to follow.
Right. Yeah, no, it really is. This all came into being. It's a very interesting story. I'm sure a lot of your viewers already know it, but a lot of the talk about religious freedom these days is really not constitutional law at all. It has to do with a statute that was passed back in the early 90s called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. RFRA is the shorthand for it. But a lot of the cases that have come down in recent years have been decided not on constitutional grounds, but on RFRA grounds. The idea behind RFRA is that laws can't conflict with sincerely held religious beliefs, at least not easily. It's a complicated analysis, but RFRA was passed almost unanimously back in the early 90s. Liberals were behind it just as much as conservatives. In fact, the only senator who voted against it was the arch conservative senator, Jesse Helms, from, I think it was South Carolina, maybe North Carolina. But Jesse Helms was kind of the arch right-wing nutcase of his day. But he was suspicious of RFRA because he thought it might be some kind of liberal conspiracy to allow people to use peyote and things like that. But as it turned out, the ACLU, People for the American Way, the American Humanist Association, I believe all of those groups back in the day were all thumbs up for RFRA. They thought it was a great idea. And conservative groups did too. I think they saw what it was really going to turn into. And as it's turned out, it's just been disastrous for church-state separation, absolutely disastrous. Jefferson's wall of separation has been battered. It's just barely standing these days, and the direction the court's going, you have to wonder if it'll be standing at all in a few years.
What's your take on Amy Coney Barrett?
Well, my suspicion is that she's just what people think she's going to be. She's going to see very little value in church-state separation, and she's going to be hostile to reproductive freedom as we know it. And she's going to be hostile probably to the Affordable Care Act, and she's going to be hostile to LGBT rights, same-sex marriage, things like that. We'll see how it plays out. Hopefully she'll have some respect for precedent. And if she does, then those areas might not get as hard hit as we're worried about. But I'm certainly not a big fan of hers being on the Supreme Court.
Indeed. So we're heading towards the end of our time. I have you till 10:30 today. But what are you doing right now that we may not be aware of? Because I know that you're a lawyer, obviously. Are you taking any cases? I know that you argued against the Pledge of Allegiance for students in the state of Massachusetts to have to say under God several years ago. Do you have anything like that cooking?
On the constitutional front, no, I've actually stepped away from that. I left my position with the American Humanist Association as legal director a little over a year ago. I never did close my practice here in Massachusetts doing civil litigation and tort law. But as far as constitutional work, I haven't taken on anything new lately. No, mainly my activism has actually been toned down a little bit over the last few years. I'm writing still for Psychology Today, and I write for other outlets on occasion. But as far as activism, I've gone more local. I'm active in the local Democratic Party here in Massachusetts. But that's about it. I haven't had a position with any of the secular groups since I left the AHA as legal director last year.
Sure. Being a rational person, or attempting to be a rational person, how have you been able to navigate the election so far?
Well, I'm really baffled by the people who are out there calling themselves undecided because it hasn't been too hard for me to navigate the election because it seems like the choice is so obvious. To me, the Republican Party has just gone off a cliff. I mean, they were pretty out there even a couple generations ago, back in the early 80s, when the moral majority started to get its grip on the party. And they've, even back then, to me, it seemed like they were kind of just too far gone to really take seriously. But in the last 40 years, it's only gotten worse. So it's not very hard for me to navigate. I tend to go blue right down the ballot. As not that I'm really that much of a party man. I would gladly vote for other candidates if they didn't deny evolution and climate change in the corporate sector. But it really seems like the Democratic Party, not that they're, they've got their faults, believe me, they certainly do. But compared to the other choice, it's not much of a decision.
Do you watch, or have you watched the debates that have occurred?
I have had no interest in watching the debates. I think it's giving Trump too much dignity to take him seriously. And really, the American presidential debates are kind of a joke anyway. They're not really debates. They're just, everyone's looking for somebody to make a silly mistake or to get in a good zinger. That's the headline the next day. If somebody gets in a good zinger, like somehow that amounts to being qualified for office or not. So I just can't take them seriously.
Well said. Is there anything that I missed from the article, or is there any other topic you wanted to chat about before we close?
No, I really don't think we have too much time, but it's been great. I love the topic of anti-intellectualism. Not that I hold myself out as any special expert on it, but I really do think it gets to the heart of what is troubling our society, is that there's just not enough critical thinking, and there's too much irrational thinking. So I love talking about it, and I thank you for having me on.
This has been a great conversation. Thank you very much, David Niosi. We have an open door policy here. You ever want to come back on? You have another article or another book. If you have another book coming out, we'd be glad to help you to promote it.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Thanks everyone in the chat. Take care.